Hi class, Professor Cook here. I wanted to check in with you all and also to provide a little bit of audio and screen lecture for you for the second part of these slides. We already covered the first part of this about the Hmong ethnic group and community and about cultural assimilation prior to these long extended spring break, but I wanted to explain and check back in with you on these concepts from sociology on the social construction of illness. All right, so I'm going to just chat a little bit to you briefly about this and navigate through the slides. So, from a sociological perspective, illness is something that exists both at a biological level and an individual, organism level, but also is socially constructed. We're seeing some actually really interesting examples of this with the coronavirus, with COVID 19. Of course, it has affected all of us, and that's why I'm even presenting this material that way. But what I mean by this is the meaning that we make of this illness inherently is a social process. I'm not saying that it doesn't exist. It's not a social construct in that if we stop believing in the illness, it will no longer exist. That's not what I mean here. What I mean is that knowledge about this and the way that we understand it and the way that we look at the ramifications of it is constructed through a social process. I mean, we can even think about how we knew about this virus, and arguably our government and other leaders did not act soon enough and take it seriously enough, early enough in the process to prevent some of what we're going through right now. Okay, so the three key insights: all illnesses have cultural meaning for both individuals and for society. So that all this means is that there are different ways we experience illnesses. Like right now, what's really interesting for us is that with COVID, we may not have personal experience with that. Hopefully, none of us will actually become ill with this, but it might trigger anxiety for us. It might trigger depression, and it's certainly affecting our whole, day-to-day, quote-unquote, normal operations in ways that we didn't expect, and it's highlighting all of the interdependencies we have, right? I mean, there is no industry or no individual right now, I think, on Earth whose life hasn't been affected by this virus and our individual and social response to it. So all illnesses are constructed at the levels of the individual, so we make meaning at our own individual level. And not to again go to a difficult place, but you could think about this in terms of people who identify as having chronic illnesses or disabilities, right? Society puts assumptions on people like us. I include myself in that category of someone with a disability and chronic illness. But my own personal experience of that and how it affects my work and family and other relationships is a different entity or a different pattern. Okay, and then medical knowledge about the disease is not inherent, right? It's constructed. So we kind of got into this in The Spirit Catches You with that question I asked about even if there were translation, why did Dr. I think his name is Dr. Dan, say that there was such a cultural gap, and how did that matter? And for those of you who have submitted the written response, you can always include this. If you haven't, that's fine. But those of you who have submitted the response, what I was getting at there is that the Hmong really fundamentally did not understand the causes and origins of disease in the same way that Western medicine did. So that made, even if they had a direct translation, you've got to translate through a cultural lens as well. So that was also why I showed you that random little clip of Star Trek at the beginning of this unit. Okay, moving on. I want to introduce the concept of the sick role. We're all sort of playing a bit of this, and I don't know, I'd be interested to see how sociologists are including this in their understanding of our response to COVID, because we're all being asked to do certain things to protect one another, right? But the sick role comes from Talcott Parsons, who's a famous famous functionalist, sociologist, American sociologist from the kind of mid 20th century. So think of roles and sort of the functions. And basically, the idea here is that when you are ill, you claim this sort of claim in quotes this status of being sick, and you're not blamed necessarily for your condition. Again, it's kind of interesting to put that in current context, and you're excused from normal roles. So if you are ill, we don't expect you to perform your normal duties, especially if that would expose other individuals. So your job, though, for that sort of balance, that trade-off of responsibility versus expectations, your job is to try to get well and to follow doctor's orders. Okay, I'm actually going to skip over this part about fetal alcohol syndrome. If you're interested in this, you can shoot me a message and I'm happy to record this for you. What I was doing with this was talking about the difference between how we understand a disease and what the physical evidence of it is. So I can explain that more if you'd like, but to me it's not as important as some of the later concepts that we're going to get to. Okay, so the split horn is the other major theme that I wanted us to finish up this week. Hopefully you're able to look at that video. I think if you log into MyCCA or the library first and then try playing the video, it should work for you. You may need to put in an S number, but you should not have to log in separately to the Canopy account. Okay. So a couple of concepts from Durkheim about the sociology of religion that I think will be helpful here, and I think you can really see this in the film through looking at and thinking about the experience of Uncle Poor's funeral. So from Durkheim, who is one of the founding fathers of sociology, all religions have three things, at least. Beliefs about, especially about the differentiation between the sacred and the profane. I'll get to that in a minute. Practices or rituals, and a moral community. Okay, so what is missing here that you might expect to see in a sociological definition of religion? That's a question I usually ask folks in class. And for me, what I noticed was missing here when I was first reading this was any mention of God or gods or the afterlife, right? So for Durkheim, from a sociological perspective, what is important here is not who or what you believe in or what you think will happen after we die, but what's important here are the shared beliefs, the shared practices, and the shared community. And for Durkheim, this actually leads to culture. It leads to social solidarity through shared values. We could talk more about that next time too. All right, so beliefs here, coming back to this idea of the sacred versus the profane. When we hear profane, we usually think swear words, but that's not what he's referring to here. He's saying that human groups in somewhat ancient times would separate the world into sort of special or sacred days and sort of everyday or profane, boring, mundane might be a different way to say it in a more modernized term, reality. So think about what a religious holiday is like, or a religious celebration, or something, a day that is just really special to you, and what sets that day apart versus every day, right? So I'm going to use Christian examples, and forgive me, that's the tradition that I was raised in, so that's what I have the most experience with, but we could also think about other examples. So for Christians, Christmas, right? Christmas is a holiday wherein Christians celebrate the birth of Jesus, right? And that is always December 25th. Interestingly, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that actual person Jesus was not born in December, but was born in the fall, I think September, based on kind of some historical records. So that's a different story. But Christmas does not always fall on the same day of the week. So Christmas could happen on a Monday or a Tuesday. And to really illustrate this concept, think about how if Christmas falls on a Monday, it's not like any other Monday you experience, right? It's Christmas, so it's special. You probably eat different food, you do different things. Often we have the day off, and that kind of gets into the Christian centeredness of our society, even though a lot of folks, many folks in the US are not affiliated with Christianity or organized religion at all. Okay, so beliefs, practices, community. If you think about Paja, if you think about Leah's family, In the Spirit Catches You, you can probably identify important beliefs that their culture had, important practices, and their community, and how that was very different from what Westerners and Americans were used to, and that leading to some misunderstandings and actually unfortunate consequences for Leah. Okay. So another way to explain this, and I guess I should have been on this slide a minute ago, but is to think about why do we go to live events? What feels special about that? So those beliefs, practices, and community, celebrating together, we're all missing this a little bit right now, I think, is part of why people are experiencing depression, is we're missing the collective effervescence. We're missing that heightened emotional experience of sharing something together. And it's interesting because just a little while ago, I happened to check in on Facebook. I found myself using social media a little more just to kind of know what people outside of my house are up to, and the answer is not much, except, washing their hands and trying to find toilet paper. But basically, one of my friends was saying, I miss movie theaters, which is interesting because you can watch plenty of movies at home. You can maybe get popcorn or snacks, right? You can have ostensibly the same experience at home, but you can't. And what sets that apart, what makes that different, is there's not other people there with you, right? When you gather together, Durkheim says, you're creating this context for a heightened emotional experience. And that energy leads to group coherence and group cohesion. So therefore, for Durkheim, when we gather to worship the supernatural, not the television show now, I know y'all know I'm a fan of that, but when we gather to practice our religion, again, this is Durkheim, one thing we're actually doing is worshiping the collective. We're worshiping society, is what he is saying. So we sort of create this theological structure, according to Durkheim, as a stand-in for society because we don't know what to do with this energy as humans. Okay, so you don't have to get too far into that theory. I'd just like you to remember that collective effervescence is this concept of shared feels or a heightened emotional experience, and it's essentially why you would go to see a live play or live music or a live sporting event or a movie in a movie theater, which is way more expensive, rather than just consuming that at home, and why we would go worship together as a group. Okay, and eventually this morphs into collective consciousness, shared morality, beliefs, and norms, which serve to kind of construct and maintain a social order. And with that, I'm going to stop, and I will record another little mini lesson for you next week for starting our unit on Native Americans.